You are listening to The Breakfast Show on Faith FM with Skafy and Elliot and producer Shell here with us. We are excited and thrilled to spend this morning with you because we are going to be talking about health. We're going to be talking about a new article that has been released, having a second look at Robert Kennedy Jr.'s ideas on health in the United States. So This is the story that our friend Elliot is going to bring to us later in a few moments, actually. I'm going to be talking about some latest discoveries, research, and data from ground-penetrating radar on the famous Ararat Formation that looks like Noah's Ark that everybody has dismissed. Nobody said it was Noah's Ark. They just said it was like a freak work of nature.
Wow, there you go.
But now, everybody's having a second look. You'll find out why is that later today. And of course, we're going to have our interview with Maria Andrioli. She's going to be talking to us about how teenagers are building their identity using social media today.
I'm actually very excited for that interview.
It's going to be,
I think that'll be
it's going to be
super
great.
interesting.
But before we get into any of that, I would like to ask our beloved producer, Shell, to produce a quiz question to us. Please, Shell.
This is a fill in the blank, I believe.
Ooh.
Okay, let's fill in that blank.
From Hebrews 11, the faith chapter.
Ooh, okay.
Okay?
Nice
but
chapter.
It's going down a bit lower. Verse 38, we're after. Of whom the world was not worthy, these blank wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground. What is our fill in spot there? It's 2 words or 3 words, depending on where you're getting it from. Of whom,
So blank, blank, blank.
well, either blank, blank, or blank, blank, blank. Yeah.
Okay.
2 or 3, depending. Of whom the world was not worthy, these blank wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground. According to Hebrews 11, verse 38. I'm going to accept that one, Skafy.
From you? From
yep,
me?
Yep,
Okay.
you can have that one.
Okay, thanks.
You can have it. A point to you.
Thank you very much, producer Shell. Yeah, I had to guess kind of based on the context and so on. It was not a memorized Bible verse of mine.
Yes.
In particular.
0491064669 is our text line for you to text in what you think the missing words are here in this passage. Of whom the world was not worthy, these blank wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground.
So, Elliot, what is it that the United States Health Department minister, Mr. Robert Kennedy Jr. is doing that people are commending him online?
Yeah, well, this is what was interesting because I saw this recent article that was talking about that very thing, the new health reforms that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been putting in place in the States. And what was interesting is that he is promoting that people should eat real food. That's kind of like their campaign.
Okay.
Eat real food, which is, so it's like trying to, promote people to eat whole ingredient, single ingredient foods like fruits and vegetables. They're also promoting a lot of meat, dairy and poultry and all that kind of stuff as well. But it's interesting that he is the one, like America has been promoting this kind of health reform message. And what was interesting about this article was that there was this doctor from the UK who is a lead specialist in helping people with type 2 diabetes. And he was saying, funnily enough, like he made did a conference and he was saying, like, I actually don't like the Trump administration. Came out, but he's like, actually what RFK Jr. is saying is actually kind of legit. Like, I have been doing study helping people with type 2 diabetes, and the thing that helps them a lot is actually their diet. Diet itself has a huge impact on, helping people that are struggling with type 2 diabetes. So that was what was interesting about this article. But it begs the question, or it brings forward the question, to me, it's interesting that, we've had Ellen White's advice on health reform for ages. Like we've had.
Okay, who's we and who's Ellen White? Tell us.
Okay, that is a good point. So as Seventh-day Adventists, there is this lady that is one of the pioneers of our church. Her name is Ellen White.
Yeah, by the way, we are Seventh-day Adventist funded radio. That's why, backed radio. So that's why we have that approach here. Yeah. Just in case our listeners don't know that.
Yeah.
Full disclosure.
Anyway, she has said some things about what is good food to eat, what diet is good for us. And basically it's all natural foods. And it's interesting that, RFK Jr. is kind of following along that line, but not to the same degree. What's interesting is that he is promoting a lot of meat and dairy, like a lot of meat and dairy. And what was interesting is when
he flipped the triangle.
Yeah, I looked, there's this image that they've produced because we had, ages ago, we had the health food pyramid. Down the bottom was like grains, and then it was like fruits and veg, and then up the top was like dairy and meat, and then the very top was, oils and sugars and stuff. But
the smallest point.
Yeah. But then he's flipped this triangle upside down, and I've got this image in front of me right here. What's interesting is it's the top part is protein, dairy, and healthy fats, and next to it is healthy fruits and vegetables. And it's fascinating to see that it's almost like they're promoting meat and dairy above fruits and vegetables.
No, it's not it is.
It is definitely.
Yeah.
It is, yes.
He's a big promoter of meat. And although I disagree with that, I still think that if he achieves what he's trying to do, America's going to be so much healthier than what it is at the moment.
Yeah.
Because if you're at least trying to get whole foods and not all your processed and artificial and all of those sorts of foods, you're gonna increase your benefits are going to increase dramatically. But ultimately, I would take meat completely off of the pyramid.
Let's put the dots in the eyes here. Like in Brazil, we have a saying, and it says that in a land of blind people, the person that has only one eye is king. Do you have something similar?
I think we do.
Similar idiom?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay. So, look, when you look at the highly ultra-processed, high-in-fat diet that most Americans are subsisting on and surviving on, coming and saying, hey, let's stop eating ultra-processed foods and eat like actual food, that's definitely a step in the right direction. And we have to applaud that. At the same time, there is also, I believe, some economic interests here because beef industry is a major industry. Dairy industry is a major industry. Egg industry is a major industry in the United States. And they are powerful. And I think that the economic interests are above the health interests of the public in that case. Because there's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of data saying that for an optimal human diet, meat consumption has to be either sparse or non-existent. Animal-based products.
Yeah.
Type 2 diabetes, for example, one of the reasons of type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is acquired by consuming saturated fats, such as the ones that you find in all animal products, cheese and dairy and milk and so on. They cause insulin resistance. This is well known. So that's not going to help stop or reverse the cases of type 2 diabetes. So yes, it's a step in the right direction, but at the same time, it's also a step laterally in the wrong direction.
Yeah. In
flipping up, like the food pyramid has been built not in a vacuum. It's not just like a teenager one day drew a pyramid and put some foods there that he liked and didn't like. This is like solid years and years and years of dietary research. Now, to make the contrast, I think this is actually a counterfeit from or in stark contrast from the message that Ellen White, one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, has promoted. Because number one, in her days, there was not such a thing as processed foods.
Yeah.
Processed foods is it's a new thing. We're talking about the 1920s onwards. Yeah, actually 1950s onwards. After the World War II, that a lot of chemicals started to be added into foods. So she was not concerned about processed or ultra processed foods because there was not a thing in her time.
Yeah.
She was actually worried about people back in the days, in her days. They were, by the way, the health message that the Seventh-day Adventist Church one of the co-founders promoted was quite revolutionary at the time. For example, at her time, cigarettes were promoted as being beneficial to health. She was the first one of the first ones to say, no, cigarettes are terrible for you. Alcohol is bad for you. You have to, exercise and fresh air, not wear like clothes that are restraining your circulation. Is broader than just food, but when it comes to food, where people were eating meat at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and the snacks in between, she says, hey, you know what? A more beneficial diet would be consisted of fruits, grains, legumes, nuts, vegetables. And while at her time about 50% of what she promoted was against science, today 90% of she promoted is science has caught up with the things that she wrote about.
Which is pretty awesome.
Which is awesome. So, look, I think it's a step in the right direction. But I think that when I look at that pyramid, honestly, I think that they're more concerned with industries and economics and the economy of the country rather than the actual optimal health of the American population.
Which is true.
Because the reality is there's not a lot of profit in selling lettuce and tomatoes and whole grains. These are very low margins. But in beef, man, that's a lot of money to be made there.
There's something as well that I thought was really interesting. With that flipped diagram that RFK has made, down the very bottom is whole grains.
Yeah. It's like a paleo diet,
bottom, which
is one of the worst diets you can have.
Yeah. But what was so interesting is I remember I saw this thing and I just looked this up. There was this lady, her name's Sue Becker, and she was looking and she was like, well, if grains are so bad, then why does the Bible say, talk about bread and the bread of life? And if it's talking about bread, would God really want something for us that's actually bad for us? She actually looked into it and found that if you make your own bread with fresh wheat berries that are freshly milled, it is actually one of the healthiest things that you can have. And it has 40 of the 44 essential nutrients that we need, which is really fascinating stuff. So, yeah, there's a whole interesting thing about, what the US is doing as far as health reforms and whatnot. But for us, we want to follow what God teaches us.
You're listening to the Breakfast Show podcast on Faith FM. Positively different.
And we're going to be talking about an interesting story that you, Skafy, have on the revelation, or people have found something about Noah's Ark, right?
Yeah,
but before
that,
we have the answer to our quiz. So, Producer Shell.
Yeah, and I realized that this was probably a little bit too hard. I should have used a different blank from this text. Of whom the world was not worthy, these believers or faithful believers or people of faith, basically, because it's the faith chapter.
Okay.
So it's, the faithful wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and holes in the ground.
Okay.
There you go.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a great chapter here. Thank you very much, Producer Shell, for that one. Let's get into our story today. Noah's Ark. Have we found evidence, archaeological evidence for Noah's Ark? Well, there is a very interesting site in Turkey, in the region called the Ararat Mountains, which is exactly where the Bible tells us that the Noah's Ark landed. It's a site that has been known since the late 1950s as the Durupinar site.
Okay, Durupinar.
Why is it called Durupinar site? Because in 1959, there was a captain of the Turkish army. He was flying an aircraft and he was taking pictures for NATO so that they could have a survey and an idea of the landscape of Turkey for military purposes. And as he was reviewing these photos, he noticed that there's one very oddly shaped formation in the Ararat region, which looked a lot like a boat.
Okay.
And a lot of that discovery, that revelation applied a lot of interest from the media. And in the following year, 1960, there is a group of people who went there to excavate the area and say, hey, maybe we found Noah's Ark. Now, let me tell you why that formation is important here and why did it aroused the interest of so many people. Number one is location, right? So Mount Ararat, the mountains of Ararat, this is a location that the Bible talks about where the Noah's Ark have stopped.
Yeah.
Number two, the shape. It has the shape of a boat. I do not know if you haven't seen this picture before, text me here to 0491 064 669 with the and I'll text you a website where you can see all the photos. Number three, Elliot, were the dimensions. Now the Bible says that Noah's Ark was 300 cubits long by 50 cubits wide and 30 cubits high. That's about 156 meters long by 26 meters wide, roughly. Okay, if you use the Egyptian cubit measure. Turns out that this formation has those almost exact measurements.
Really?
Yes.
That's pretty amazing, actually.
Like on the width, it's about pinpoint. In the length is like 3 meters off, like less than 0.5% off.
Wow. So really, really close.
Yes. So in 1960, there is a group, an expedition led by an evangelist called George Vanderman, and a Seventh-day Adventist preacher. He went to that place and they decided to dig it out. So decided to make some digs and so on. But all that they found was rocks and rocks and rocks and dirt.
Okay.
They did not find at the time any evidence of any man-made materials there. Actually, they've done something that, to be honest, I am even embarrassed to say. But after 2 days excavating and finding nothing, they decided to use dynamite to see if they could go a little bit deeper and find something else. So yes, they used explosives in a potential archaeological site. Don't do this at home, kids.
What? That's so funny. Imagine that. You go, wow, maybe there's fossils of a dinosaur here.
Yes.
How about we just blow
and
the thing
apparently
up?
the archaeologists that were with them had a heart attack, but the guy that was financing the whole enterprise said, yeah, just let's do it. Let's see if we can find anything. So they blew the place up and still didn't find anything of interest.
Wow. Well, yeah, because it all got blown up, probably.
Yeah. So over the years, because of those initial revelations, George Vanderman himself, he looked at that and says, yeah, this was just a freak of nature. He uses this word. This is a freak of nature. It looks like Noah's Ark. It's in the same place, same location, but it's not Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
There's nothing here to tell us. So since then, the interest in that location faded. There's a guy that came up. His name was Ron Wyatt. He claimed to have discovered Noah's Ark, and he went there and whatnot. There had been some studies and some research, some serious research on it. And they found some very interesting geological formations, metallic structures and not structures, or metallic ores and all these kinds of things. But in the end of the day, even creationist scientists that went there to see, they say, look, as much as we would love for this to have been Noah's Ark, the reality is there's no evidence that this is other than a just very oddly shaped natural rock formation with a lot of similarities to the terrain and the ground around it.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was it. Everybody thought, okay, it's done. It looks nice. It was nice while it lasted, but it's
False
not.
alarm.
Except that in 2019, all the way to 2024, some people decided to use some novel imagery data from a ground-penetrating radars. Now, this is a fairly recent technology. We're talking about 5 to 7 years old.
Okay.
Primarily used for geological survey. And basically, you can take a picture from the sky with these radars, and they penetrate the ground, and they can find underground structures with it.
That's pretty awesome.
So it's pretty awesome. It gives a scan of different things that are underground. And actually, through these kinds of technologies, that they found out that underneath the pyramids in Egypt, there's like 1 kilometer worth of poles.
Wow.
Yeah, I do not know if you've seen this one.
I have not actually seen that. That's
a big one. Yes, in coils, like very mysterious thing.
Yeah, wow.
And so they took these pictures using ground penetrating radars, and they found out that there are structures that do resemble tunnels and rooms and accommodations all the way throughout the ark. And when you look at the photos of these ground-penetrating radars, you can see that these structures are in a perfect 90-degree angle. So they're perfectly, they look like corridors. They are long and straight, and then there's 90 degrees structures that are coming out of them, kind of resembling beams and rooms and so on.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It's fascinating. And that was in an area. And so that's one big evidence. The second big evidence is that they excavated the site again. And one of the things that they noticed is that they compared the samples from within the Jurupinar site, like where the Noah's Ark formation, and compared it with the dirt that they dug out from outside of it. And they discovered that the dirt inside has 3 times more organic matter than the outside.
Interesting.
Meaning that would be consistent with there being an ark that decomposed over time.
Yeah.
And therefore the soil there is way richer in organic matter than the soil outside of it, which is poorer in organic matter.
Yeah, wow, that is really interesting.
So the guy that is at the forefront of this initiative, he opened up, a company. The company's name is Noah's Ark Scans. So they have a website now. They just opened up a section where you can subscribe to their newsletter. And they're going to be sending some weekly newsletter to say what's going on. One of the things that they have recently done that and I think that it was very smart. They celebrated a partnership with Turkish universities, with their archaeological department, so that these Turkish universities can go down there and dig it up. Because one of the things, this is shaping, if it's true that this is Noah's Ark, this is shaping to be the greatest archaeological discoveries, probably of all time.
Yeah.
Probably of all times.
Because, if it is true, if this is Noah's Ark, then it proves that Noah's Ark existed, proves there must have been a worldwide
a story that a lot of people laughed at and said, "Oh, this could never have happened," and so on. It would be a tremendous weight of evidence to that story. And I think that the smart move about that is that by partnering up with local Turkish universities, well, they get the credit for the discovery. So Turkey will be happy because they also need the government's authorization to excavate. It is in a tricky spot because it's right at the border with Iran.
Okay.
Those mountains. So there is a little bit of, military activity there. There's some military bases not far from that location. But we are going to see. So look, it's nothing conclusive yet, but there are some really interesting evidence that just came out that is pointing, hey, maybe we should look into that again with new eyes, with fresh eyes.
You're listening to the Breakfast Show podcast on Faith FM. Positively different.
It's now the time for our interview with our resident psychologist, Maria Andrioli. She's going to be talking to us about the adolescent identity and how social media and online spaces are shaping the identity of our teenagers. Maria, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's great to have you back with us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be back on.
So, Maria, let's talk about adolescence and identity shaping. So, how are they using social media, and how does social media affect their sense of identity? Can you walk us through a little bit about why is that important for a teenager?
Yeah, for sure. So, first of all, adolescence is a really important time period. It's basically the time where the child is beginning to form their own sense of who they are. They're asking questions like, who am I? Where do I belong? What do I believe? When it comes to their actual brain, it's expanding really quickly right now as well. So they're really open to new ideas. This search for identity, it's healthy, it's normal, it's a good thing. But the problem is that now teenagers are working out these questions in online environments that have become more and more anonymous, algorithm driven, and just available all the time. So in the past, teenagers were forming their identities within their school, families, friendships, but now it's happening on this online world, and kids are having access to this online world usually exactly when this identity forming time is beginning.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are some of the risks? Is that like can they find good things there, or are there risks that they should be aware of when they are exploring different topics about their identity in online? What are some things that we should be paying attention to as both parents and also as teenagers?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I just want to put it out there that I don't think the online space is always bad, and many teens have found some really helpful groups online, very amazing support groups. But I do want to bring up an example that I think will highlight the risks. So I think about somewhere like 10 years ago, there was a rise in this online platform called Tumblr. Are you familiar with Tumblr?
I've heard about it. I've never really spent some time. Have you, Elliot?
I haven't really used it much myself either.
So what is Tumblr? It's like a Facebook of sorts, or it's like a Reddit?
Yeah, look, I guess it's well, it's actually it's neither, but I'm sure it's similar with both in some way. So basically, it became a platform. It was mostly visual posts. So it was not like statuses like Facebook, or it was all visual posts. It was anonymous. So the person did not share their identity online, and it just gave people the opportunity to reblog different posts and form little kind of, subgroups surrounding these different images, right? So many teenagers were using Tumblr around this time, and then there was a huge rise in self-harming content on Tumblr. Right? So a lot of people reposting images of all sorts of different kinds of self-harm, and then people would start posting themselves self-harming. And not only was it the fact that, this is already, you can already imagine why this is problematic. There's all this self-harm content that lots of kids are being exposed to. It's that a real community began to form around this subculture. And the danger was that it was not really about getting kids help, but it was about this idea of like, this is our pain. This is our identity. This is how people like us express it, right? So we've now tied this pain to a sense of identity, a group, and belonging. And around this time, the research showed, look, I couldn't find Australian research, but in the UK, there was a huge increase in self-harm following the spreading of these images. Not saying that it caused it, but it's important to note about, I think, like 68%. And so what you can imagine now is when we tie something harmful to a sense of identity and belonging, that person no longer wants to recover, because recovery means losing a sense of their own identity and a sense of community. Now, that's just one example. I'm not saying Tumblr is bad. I think there was a lot of helpful content on there too. It's just an engine. It's just a platform, but it's an example of how these online groups can form that can actually be quite problematic. And I think, there's more and more of these different subgroups that I've seen with my own clients coming up more and more often. So I think it's something that's really important for us to be aware about.
Maria, this is very interesting that you bring that up. And I can think of, some teenagers that I met and some parents that were really worried because they're teenagers. They entered into some rabbit holes in the internet, and all of a sudden that really helped to shape a lot of their philosophy, a lot of their mindset, and which was leading to very risky behaviors in regards to various areas of their lives. And how does that work? And what can parents do? Because the parents at the same time, they were quite they were worried that if they would limit the internet connection or the access to their teenagers at that time, they were worried that this could cause some kind of rebellion of the teenagers, that they would resist then going to school or to communicating with the parents. So they allowed them to navigate and use the internet freely, but at the same time they were also worried because they were quite worried with the contents that they were consuming and how the algorithm was feeding them. What are some of the elements here in those stories? Is that story isolated, or is this something that you as a psychologist you see frequently?
Yeah, you raised a really good point that parents are really scared to now remove these things from their teenagers. They have reason. They do have good reason to feel that way. Look, I've seen it a lot with my clients. You asked how it worked, and I guess it's, coming back to, they're searching for that sense of identity. Being a teenager is a really confusing time. There's lots of hormones and emotions, and I guess these online platforms can very much give an explanation for their pain, and if they're struggling socially, can provide them a group and a sense of belonging as well. So it makes sense why it's so powerful. Look, as parents, I think that it's really important that we are aware of this when our kids are growing, so we can be more proactive in our approach, meaning we get to it before it gets to them, because once the child has access to all of these groups, and especially if these groups are more high risk messages coming across that are leading to risk of serious self-harm or even not listening to parents, it becomes very difficult to now remove it. I have a lot of clients who their children have gotten so deep into these online communities. Look, some are helpful and they do find some of them helpful, but some of them are not. Some of them are actually really unhelpful, and it means so much to them, where if there is a real fear that if they take it off them, that child will become suicidal. And the kids, my clients have said that, like, this is the only thing that brings me meaning and belonging. And I don't actually advise parents to remove it. It's like, we've gone too far down the rabbit hole now, So the first thing I would tell parents is, like, you need to be aware. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We need to be guiding our children from before adolescence and before they have access to the online world. And once we decide to give them access, we need to be very aware of it and having open conversations. But look, I don't want any parents listening whose teens are already quite far into this, these online groups and identities to feel a sense of discouragement. It's never too late, but I will say that you have to be very careful in your approach. You cannot, if you, I guess the more you shame that child about, what they might be learning, what they might have gotten involved in, what they might be doing online, the more you try to be very restrictive and controlling when you have in the past given them a lot of freedom, that might not be the best approach. You might actually push them further into secrecy. So I think when we've gotten so far, the best thing to do, first of all, is work on reconnecting with that child. You may not agree with what their beliefs they're starting to carry and hold now based off those online communities. But I think we need to start with connection. And from there, we need to get curious and ask questions, not saying, oh, this is ridiculous. What are you saying? Why are you dressing this way? What are you coming up with? But asking the questions, what is this online space giving you? What is it providing for you that you don't feel out here? And do you feel better or worse after being there? How does it help you? And really just starting at that point is just starting at connection and asking the questions with the mindset of, well, why did they get involved in this? What were they lacking that made them feel that this is something that they needed? What did this provide for them?
That is fascinating. And it's good that you're helping us to get some language to even start these conversations, but in a very natural, non-judgmental and accepting, caring way. Because I think this is, as you mentioned, the risk is to push them even further into secrecy, into close and to shut that door of communication even further. One question that I have for you, Maria, is that I think that in these online communities, we often see a bunch of teenagers, going around, they're just trying to figure things out in life, and perhaps some of them with some unhelpful ideas and identities. But who else is lurking in the shadows in these groups? Are these spaces really safe for teens to just explore who they are? Or do we see other figures, other actors as well exploiting those vulnerabilities?
Yeah. Look, well, I mean, So I won't say there's no online safe spaces because there are some really awesome online groups that I've come across that have really helped people not feel alone in their challenges. But I think the reality with a lot of these new platforms and servers is there is a higher level of anonymity than what we're used to with just say Facebook. I mean, anyone can create a fake account on Facebook, but a lot of these newer platforms that teens are using are built around this sense that it is anonymous. And there's a lot more, people who are actually one of the interesting things is that many teenagers are exploring with different identities and personas online now as well. And that's part of that identity forming. Something that we've never been able to do in the past is teens are being able to show up online and pretend to be different genders, pretend to be different ages, which, complicates things even more. But also we don't know, there could be adults very much in many of these groups that are guiding more vulnerable younger people, and they might have more sinister motives because they are old enough to know better. So absolutely, they're not always safe spaces. And look, here's what I'll say. I think we need to be able to know the difference between what is an online safe space versus what is a more harmful online community. And I think some red flags that parents want to look out for is when your teen's online life has a sense of secrecy. There's a lot of secrecy around what they're doing. They're beginning to isolate themselves more. They're beginning to develop very rigid ideas that seem like they've come out of nowhere. I'd be questioning what kind of they're part of online. And when their language sounds like very much like a kind of script rather than showing any kind of critical thinking, like they're just speaking like very kind of specific scripts and new language that, isn't part of, the world. And I guess we all learn things online, but when there's like a sense of secrecy, rigidity, and just not being able to tolerate different ideas, and withdrawal, I would say that these are the red flags that those groups may not actually be safe spaces.
I see. So, Maria, what are some of the, parting words that you can give to parents that are quite worried with the patterns, the usages of their teenagers in terms of social media and online consumption? You gave us already some good examples of conversation starters, but if you could just distill down to like one or two key thoughts, what would they be?
I think parents have gotten good at asking, what are our kids watching online? We are aware of this, especially within Christian homes, but I think we also need to be asking the question is who is helping my child become who they are? Because we need to recognize that it's not just what they're consuming, but in this developmental period is what is the identity that they are now forming.
Okay. Well, Maria, thank you so much. This is such helpful advice here, and not advice, but education really, and awareness around this topic. We're looking forward to talk to you again in a fortnight.
Thanks.
Thanks for being a part of the Faith FM family. Join our community on Facebook or get in touch at 1-800-FAITH-FM.